I will be using an airbrush, and I have a German make airbrush. It is quite a good one. I wouldn't say this is the best one. It didn't really meet the expectation I had of it. For the spraying of the buildings with an airbrush, what you really need is 0.3 or in some cases maybe even 0.4. That's the needle or the nozzle diameter in millimeters. Cheap Chinese airbrush. Yeah, so just pick any cheap Chinese airbrush with 0.3 nozzle and needle out of eBay or other, maybe some hobby supplier. In Poland it's about 100 zloty, so it should be about 25 euro, $30. Yeah, that should be enough. This is about 200 euro. Yeah, so you don't really need that much. This I use for painting miniatures, so it is 0.2 millimeter nozzle and needle. I also have another needle and nozzle 0.15, but it gets clogged really easily, so you don't want to use this. Now, when it comes to paints, I cannot recommend enough the Vallejo products, the surface primers. So these are acrylic polyurethane, so they behave differently than your normal acrylic paint. They are thicker, so this also tends to them clogging the airbrush a little bit. They are also designed to be used with an airbrush, so basically you just mix them, put them into an airbrush, and that's it. You don't really need to add anything. There are some flow improvers for the paints, and if you are using any other paint not specifically designed for use with airbrush, it has too thick consistency, then you may want to use some flow improvers, but we are in Poland, so what do you think we could use for a flow improver for an airbrush? That's right, vodka. Yeah, so this is a 40% pure vodka. That's the cheapest brand we could have. It is not for drinking. We wouldn't want to put it inside ourselves. But for airbrush, yeah, that works. It works better than water. It dilutes the paint. You add a little bit of it, and it just wonders. And we use it instead of flow improvers, or in addition to, in some cases. Yeah, so let's get started. Let's prepare. As any modeler would know, what you use is newspapers. Perfect. I will start with maybe some foam, and just, as I said, straight from the cup. I hope I had the airbrush cleaned enough. Yep. Okay. So I want to use my examination glove, or I will be spending way too much time cleaning my fingers, and just with undercoat, you really with an airbrush, you really want to actually get a lot of paint on the model. From somebody who uses airbrush, you can often hear that less is more, and that's correct, but that's correct for like shading and adding some layers and changing hues of the colors. For the actual undercoat, yeah, you really want it to cover the base coat. So I'm just using the gray primer again. For the most part, I use it for most of the models, the gray undercoat and then white, and then I either use normal paints with a medium added, so that the actual hues of the undercoat show through, or I just put some the go-to color into the airbrush and spray. Why I don't just spray, for example, orange or yellow or blue on the black undercoat? Because it just takes away from the color, especially from the airbrush. The layer of the paint is thin enough to actually deduct from the vibrant color of the paint. In some cases you may want to go for it, but well, yeah, if you want to have any sort of bright model, then you want to go with the gray. Now you may notice if you look closer that I didn't go for the complete coverage of the gray. There are some places that some of the black is showing, especially the under the minus angles as we call them. So you want to spray with the airbrush a little bit from the top. This is not a diagonal like the zenithal lighting, because this is a technique that you may use where you just take a model and imagine that the airbrush is your sun, and you just put the paint. You may also use it with the spray can, and yeah, just put the paint directly from top to bottom with the airbrush or spray. And what you get, I'm not making this like completely zenithal light. I am just using a little bit variation, like 10 to 15 degrees from the top angle. And what you get is a model, of course it rolls, that gets all those nice shading. So you actually get a model that is pre-shaded. And professional painters use it a lot. I use it a lot. I know a lot of the Golden Demon winners and other competition winners use this a lot as the first stage of the undercoat of the model, because this helps them to actually bring the light to the model. Okay, so with the HDF, this is primed with the spray primer, and what I want to show you now is how different the undercoat covers on the areas that are black before you undercoat them, and the areas that are normally brown. So the ones that have the glue and the charcoal and the normal ones. I only get one coat of the black paint, so hopefully there will be some differentiation, because that's what I want to tell you and show you, but it might not be. Yeah, as you can see, there is a lot of paint, and I have to actually use a lot of small moves to actually cover. This is not like your car painter perfect unanimous coat of paint, because the airbrush is not suited for it. I would have to have a rather paint pistol rather than an airbrush with such a small needle. You cannot really see any difference. Some maybe. This area here is almost completely gray, and this area here still shows some black. And this is mainly the charcoal and the glue just eating its way through the paint. So you really need to put a lot of attention to actually sealing those areas with 2 coats of spray paint, because otherwise you just have to spend more time airbrushing over it and use more paint. It is still possible with the surface primers, but with a normal paint, that's a bit too much. Okay, so I think I will continue painting, and you will come about and see the effects later. I'm nearing the completion of our priming with the airbrush. As you can see, this is not a monotone surface, like one tone, because I'm not trying to achieve something like you would with painting cars, for example. So in this surface I will just try to show you what I mean. Is then you paint your paint so that it it is drying on the actual model, this is what the actual priming should look like. Yeah? So this is not what I'm going for, because this is dull. So I'm trying to use the layers underneath and build the actual look of the model. So I am using the undercoat. Now I'm using the base coat using the surface primer. And what I can do is actually spray some odd tiles here and some corners with this gray base coat. This is still the same color I'm using, and I'm already building this very distinct pattern on the building. Now in this you cannot overdo it, so now the less is more. So you have to put attention not to get something like this, or unless this is for what you are going for. But I will show you how to use different paints to actually quickly paint the whole building so that it looks really nice and doesn't really require you to use much of the actual paintbrush. Because for the catalog buildings, when I paint them, I actually do use a paintbrush and actually line every single one of those tiles and the corners, etc., etc. But that's another level of painting. For the tabletop, you don't really need. This is still much better than just using an acrylic paint and big old paintbrush and going completely flat with paint all over it. Now I'm running out of paint, which is good because I'm already finishing my touches. I'm just adding it all generally around the corners of the building to make it a little bit lighter, but I will in a moment switch to white. I may just as well just take the paint out of the paintbrush. Now, since white and gray are basically very similar to each other and we are not going for ultra clean look but just base coat, so I can basically put white straight over the gray, and the first take will be a little bit not white, a little bit grayish, but then it will clean up. Normally what I would use when switching colors is airbrush cleaner, which is basically a very good mixture of acrylic paint remover. So this is not like something that you would use to actually make the paint flow better, but actually remove the paint. But normal paint remover is made in such a way that it stays in the airbrush, and then you have to clean it because then if you put another layer of paint into the paint remover, then it will just clog. And this is different. This is smoother, it less harsh on the paint, so it just cleans the airbrush, and then you can just make it make it dry, and then put another paint. For switching from gray to white, I'm not bothered to do this, and I will now just maybe use another building because this is very large and doesn't really show very good on the camera. So I will just use this staircase, and use the white around the corners and on some of the tiles. So again, I'm not using the white overly. It is not actually meant to look completely pristine white. You can go for it, but it's not really needed. It is better to actually have some differentiation on your building. It will look better. Even though it's not pure white, your eye will tell you that this is white. So, and I'm not trying to make this building pure white. I will most likely use some other colors later to make it more colorful. I'm just trying to get the right, I would say, contrasts on this building, so that the actual areas are bright enough to actually not require several layers of other colors, but that would just one very thin layer would be enough. So if we now put, it doesn't really look like much it changed, but if we now put those two together, you can quite clearly see that this is much whiter. So, and this is the same I will use for most of the models. So for example, this car, I still have some white here. I will just generally add some white from the top down. As you can see, it really doesn't take much. With the airbrush, the painting is much quicker. It is just the preparation, the planning, because you have to apply colors in a certain order to actually get the result that you really need. And then the cleaning, because the airbrush, if you have a cheaper airbrush and basically not airbrush designed paints, then it will clog. It will clog a lot, and you will hate it, and you will hate me for saying that airbrush is fine. No, it is not worth it. Then the paint flow improver might help. Yeah, so all those vehicles are very similar right now. Still, since I have some white paint, I will just use it generally on other things. I'm just improving the, I would say, lighting of the models, of all those terrain pieces. So again, top down, so you want to imitate the light shining down on the models. Oh, see? I said it, and it clogged. Most likely because I just used the white after the gray, and yeah, it backfired. So now we'll need to clean it up, so pause. So I had to clean the airbrush a little bit because it clogged, basically. So it wasn't really that much, but I had to disassemble it. And this is where the actual full metal airbrush shines over some cheaper brands, because this is really simple and easy, and you will do this a lot in airbrush. So now I'm using the airbrush cleaner, so that's the paint remover I said earlier, to make sure that there is just a little bit of white in here, but I'm quite alright with it. It's not the end of the world. And now I will use some actual color. So if you want to add some colors, then what you want to do is most likely start with the least aggressive color, if you know what I mean. If you are trying to paint multiple different colors in one go, because then you don't have to strip and disassemble the airbrush every single time that you change the colors, but you can use the actual airbrush cleaner to just flush it out and then put another color that is just slightly different. So in this case I will start with the yellow. I don't have the good yellow, I had it run out, so I will use a shade actually, because this should be a good consistency to actually flow the airbrush without any changes. Then if I'm to continue this, I will most likely use wood, right, rust, then red, and then I will most likely need to clean the airbrush before switching to French blue. This is the direction of the colors, because if I start with blue, then it is too different from all the other colors. If they mix up in the airbrush, then I get some greens or browns, or etc, etc. And if I start with yellow, then this color obviously has some yellow in it, so it's no biggie. This color has some brown in it, so no biggie. This color has some reddish brown, so no biggie. So they all work together. Maybe only the Italian red will look a little bit washed out. So let me try this. I have not actually used this color in a spray paint before, so how to if you do not have the paint with applicator, so this is the paint with applicator, this is designed for airbrush, so it's model air or game air or anything. It has the applicator like all the Vallejo, so you can just pour it into the airbrush. Now if you have this cup, then you want to use your paintbrush, the handle of it, and just pour it over the handle. This way you don't get too much, and if there are any particles in the paint, they stay in the paint, they just don't pour through the airbrush, so you get much cleaner mix into your airbrush, and you just don't want any of the particles. So let's start with a yellow sports car. So just a very gentle coat, you just don't want to overdo it. You want to have the white and the gray and the black actually somewhere underneath there. Okay, so this is a yellow car. Done. Now I want this one, or maybe I want the truck. Maybe I want it red. But to make red look good on the white, you would need to add a yellow coat. Why? Because red straight over the white would look a little bit pink, unless you actually use a lot of it. So, and we are not trying to use a lot of paint, we are trying to use the actual shading that we achieved with layers applied before. Whoops. Vigorous shaking spills the paint. Yep, so let's just put the stop to vigorous shaking. Yeah. So this will be red, and now I'm already out of yellow. So with this, I want them different colors. So I will need to use masking tape, but more on it later when we come to masking tape and some designs that can be sprayed upon. I don't have any use for the yellow, so I will just put it back into the container. It might be slightly contaminated with other paints, so just don't do this every single time. You have to put your common sense into it. I know that I had it pretty cleaned and the only residue was white, and I was not getting any white into the spray paint, so I'm pretty confident that it was more or less pure yellow. So I'm just using a little bit of the airbrush cleaner to clean the airbrush in between the paints. And now, as I said, I will be using the wood. So I just add a little bit of wood, just a little bit, because I want maybe this car to be this old school browny stuff. Yeah, so I will use a little bit more paint than yellow, because this paint is pretty yellowish and it would look yellow, very similar to the yellow. Oh, out of paint. You don't want your airbrush to be actually producing this sound for too much, because then all the paint that is in the nozzle will dry and you will get a clogged airbrush that you will need to disassemble and clean. So this has much more of the paint, so there is much less of the shading visible. There is some on the underside of this notch in the car, and here you can see the black, but here I used a little bit too much of the paint, mainly because I ran out and I panicked and I added some more paint, and I just really didn't need it. I just needed a little drop of paint to actually add underneath one of those fenders. So now I cleaned the airbrush again. Now this is the beauty of using the actual paints that are designed for the airbrush, that you don't have to mix them up with paint flow improver or vodka. You just put them in. Now sometimes over time they of course they lose some water, they lose some fluid, so they get denser and they flow worse, so they may clog your airbrush, so you don't after some time, when they sit open like this for too long, then you really want to add a few drops of vodka or paint flow improver in there, but not in this case. Yeah, as you can see, I just added a few drops of the paint, and for one car that's way too many. That's also why for the airbrush it is so important to actually plan your work ahead, because otherwise you end up with all those wasted paint and all those wasted time switching paints. You have to plan what you want to paint, in what colors. Okay, so I don't really see the use of red. Yeah, this was supposed to be red, so I will just add some red here right now to have the track in red. I don't want this one to get red. Okay. I think I have some clogging issues again. Yeah, so I think I will save the blue. It's just not worth actually switching the airbrush right now for the demonstration purposes. Maybe what I will do is I will show you on one of the crates that the red without the yellow actually looks different. So yeah, you have to add a lot of red to actually have pure Italian red, as it says on the tin. And if you just go for the light dusting, as I did on the car, to actually get all those shades, you get a very different shade than is on the car. Very different shade. Yeah, so this is like a little bit pinkish. This is the pure Italian red, but you actually lose all the benefits of the pre-shading, because you have to use a lot of paint to actually get the coverage. And here it's sort of red, it's sort of shaded. Well, it's not perfect, but it's good enough for me. Yeah, I don't really need to shade it anymore. Yeah. So okay, so that's it.